Hello everyone, welcome to Excel with Isaac series, and in this video I'll be showing you a better way to fill formulas down and right. This method will help you improve your Excel speed and will make you an overall better Excel professional. Now the areas we'll be covering are the default ways formulas are filled down and right, and then I'll show you the drawbacks with those ways, and then after that we'll pivot to important navigation tips. These navigation tips are extremely important if you want to be very good in Excel and work very fast in Excel. Then after learning the important navigation tips, we'll come down to the same examples and then we'll apply the fill formula down and fill formula right using the recommended way. So with that, let's begin. So now taking a look at the data set I have here, if you look at the total amount column, I've summed the salary and the bonus cells to give me the total amount. Now the default way you can apply this formula down is to come to the corner of the cell. You see that the icon changes into a plus button. And once you see that icon, you can click and hold and then drag down. So as I'm dragging down, the formula will be applied. Already you can see the drawback with this method because if you have so many rows, that means you have to click and hold and keep dragging and dragging and dragging till you reach the bottom of the list. And that can take a lot of time depending on the number of rows you have in your data set. So now let's delete this and then let's write the formula again. So now that's the first way you can fill formulas down. The second way you can fill formulas down is after writing the formula, you come down to the right corner of the formula cell and then you can double click. Now this way also works. However, when I scroll down, let me show you something. So you realize that when you double click, the formula works up until the point where Excel sees an empty row. Now once there's an empty row, your fill formula stops there. And so what you have to do is copy the formula, skip the empty row, paste again, and then double click. And then you have to scroll down to actually see if the formula has applied to all the cells below. So as you can see, the formula has applied up until this cell. And to complete that, you need to copy this, paste here, and then double click again. Now the drawback with this is that if you do not know that you have empty cells, you will think that you've applied the formula to all the cells. And say if you're going to sum that column range to get a final sales amount, you'll be understating the sum value. So that's one of the drawbacks to note when you fill cells down this way. In the first method, we're dragging down, and in the second method, we're double clicking. Both of these methods have their drawback, and I wouldn't recommend this as a way you fill cells down. Let's move on to filling cells right. Now to fill cells right, imagine I have this gross amount and I want to net the amount based on the tax rate up here. The net amount will be equal to the gross amount divided by the tax rate, and then I hit enter. Now if I want to apply the formula across, again similar to the first instance where we're dragging down, I'll come to the right corner of the formula cell, I'll click and hold, and then I'll drag across to the right hand side, and then I'll fill the formula across. Again, imagine you had a lot of columns to the right hand side and you had to drag this formula all the way across. This can take so much time. And so I would recommend filling cells across this way. So now I'll pivot to navigation tips. When we are done with the navigation tips, we'll come back to this problem, and then based on our knowledge of navigation tips, we'll apply our fill formula down and right. So with that, let's move on to the navigation tips. So the first thing I want to show is how do you jump down the sheet in Excel. Another way I call it is to teleport down. So the way to teleport down is to put your hand on control and then press the down arrow key. Now once you do that, you can see that we've jumped to the last row in Excel. So the way to jump down is you put your hand on control and then press the down arrow key. Now if you want to jump back up, you put your hand on control again and then you press the up arrow key. And as you can see, I've jumped back up to the first cell. Now in our second example, let's try to jump down again. We are currently in column B. So now let's apply the control. So we put our hand on control and then we press the down arrow key. Now I realize that in the second example, when we jump down, Excel jumps up onto the point where the cell has some information inside it. So once Excel sees that there's some information inside the cell, Excel stops at that point. If you try jumping down again, control down, you see that Excel jumps up onto the point where there's information in the cell again. And if you try jumping down again, Let's see what happens. Excel jumps again to the point where there's information in the cell. And the purpose of the second example where we jump down is to demonstrate to you that anytime you are trying to jump down, the idea of Excel is that let me just go to the bottom of the sheet. However, if I see that there's something in the cell, I only jump up until the point where there's something in the cell. If there's nothing in the cell, I keep jumping till I reach the bottom of the sheet. So in this case, if we jump again, you see that we are at the bottom of the sheet because there was nothing stopping Excel from getting to the bottom of the sheet. So now let's jump all the way up again. So now we are done with jumping down. Let's move on to the next thing, which is how to select multiple cells while jumping down in Excel. Now in Excel, the way we select multiple cells is you put your hand on the shift key, and with your hand on the shift key, you can press the down arrow key. So once your hand is on shift, the way Excel interprets this is that you're about to select multiple cells. So how many cells are you selecting? And with your hand on shift and the down arrow key, you're able to select multiple cells. Now let's come back up here. What if you wanted to select multiple cells while jumping down? How do you do that? Remember in the first example, jumping down is control down. And then to select multiple cells downward, it's a shift with the down arrow key. So now if you want to jump down while selecting multiple cells, it's going to be the control. With your hand on control, you press the shift button. And with your hand on shift, you press the down arrow key. And as you can see, we've selected all the cells as we were jumping down. Now let's jump back up, which will be control. And with the hand on control, we press the up arrow key. And now we are back at the top. So now let's try jumping multiple cells down in column E as well. So in order to jump down multiple cells, we put our hand on control, and with the hand on control, we press the shift key. And with the hand on the control and the shift key, we press the down arrow key. Now you realize that in this case, as we jump down, Excel has selected multiple cells while jumping down up until the point where there was something in the cell. Now, similar to the first example where when you were jumping down and there was something in the cell, Excel stopped. When you are jumping multiple cells down and there's something in the cell, Excel stops at that point. And now when I try jumping down while selecting multiple cells again with the control shift and down key, you see that Excel has stopped at the next point where there was something in the cell. So now if I want to get to the bottom of the sheet, I need to press the control shift down arrow key multiple times till Excel has bypassed all the cells that had information in them. And once I bypass all those cells, Excel has brought me to the bottom of the sheet. So now we are done with jumping down and then jumping down while highlighting cells. Let's move on to teleporting right of the sheet. So in order to teleport right of the sheet, what we need to do is to put our hand on control, and with our hand on control, we press the right arrow key. Now once we do that, you realize that Excel has brought us to the last column in Excel, which is column XFD. And if we want to go back to the beginning point, we put our hand on control, and with our hand on control, we press the left arrow key. And as you can see, we are back to the beginning point. Now let's see what happens in the second example as we apply this method. So we put our hand on control and then we press the right arrow key. Now as you can see, Excel has jumped up onto the point where there was information in the cell. And then if you try control with the right arrow key again, Excel jumps again up onto the point where there's information in the cell. Now if I keep using the control right, Excel keeps jumping up onto the point where there is information till there's no information in the cell. And then Excel brings me to the last column, which is XFD. So now if you want to jump back to the beginning, you need to use the control left. Again, Excel jumps back up onto the point where there's information in the cell. So if you want to get back to the beginning, you need to apply the control left multiple times. And now we are back at the beginning. So that was about teleporting right using the control and then the right arrow key. Now, how do we teleport right whilst selecting multiple cells? Now, remember, if you want to select multiple cells, you put your hand on the shift key with your right arrow key. You are selecting multiple cells. Now, if you want to jump right while selecting multiple cells, remember control plus the right is to jump. So now if you want to select multiple cells while jumping right, You put your hand on control, and with your hand on control, you press the shift key, and with your hand on the shift key, you press the right arrow key. And as you can see, we've jumped to the last column in Excel. However, we've highlighted the cells as we were jumping. Now let's come back to the beginning, which is control left, and we are back at the beginning. Now let's try jumping right while selecting multiple cells in the second scenario. And to jump right, again, we put our hand on control, and with our hand on control, we press the shift key, and with our hand on the control and shift key, we press the right arrow key. Now again, Excel has been able to jump whilst highlighting multiple cells up until the point where there is information in the cell. And if you want to get to the last column in Excel, it means we need to put our hand on Control, Shift, and Right and apply it multiple times. Because anytime we apply the Control, Shift, Right, Excel will always stop in the cell that has information. So let's try our hands on this. Control, Shift, Right, Excel stops. Control, Shift, Right, Excel stops. Control, Shift, Right. Excel now brings us to the last column. So whenever Excel bypasses all the cells with information in them, Excel can finally jump to the last column. So now let's go back to the beginning, which is control left. We are back at the beginning. So these are the two important navigation tips I would want you to master moving forward. I recommend you practice this method time and time again. Once you get the hang of it, let's go back to filling cells down with your formula, applying this knowledge of navigation tips. So with that, I can now show you how to fill cells down and cells right using our knowledge of navigation tips. So now how do we fill cells down using knowledge of navigation tips? In this cell, you've written your formula, but you need to find a way to apply the formula downwards. Now, in order to apply the formula downwards, we need to determine what the last row in our data set is. Now, if you decide to jump down from the cell that we've written the formula, we can see that Excel has brought us to the last row in our data set because there's nothing impeding Excel from getting to the bottom of the sheet. So now let's go back up, Control up. Now, in order to be able to determine the last row in the data set, what we need to do is to select a cell within our data set where we've not written any formula, and then try to get to the bottom of the sheet using the control down. So now we select this cell, and then let's try to get to the bottom of the sheet using control down. So after selecting the cell, press our control down, till we know that we are at the bottom of the sheet. And you can see that as I kept pressing control down, Excel has brought me to the last row in the sheet. And in order to go back up, I use the control up. So now this is the last row in our data set. Now, once you're able to determine the last row in our data set, what we need to do is to come to the column that we wrote the formula. Remember, we've written the formula at the top cell. So we come to the column that we wrote the formula and then put in a placeholder. Now, once we've put in a placeholder, let's see what happens when we try jumping down. So let's go back to the top, which is control up. Now, if you try jumping down with the control down, you see that instead of getting to the bottom of the sheet this time around, we've stopped at the last row in our data set. And that's the first tip I want to give you guys. Anytime you want to apply formulas down, make sure that you're able to identify the last row in your data set and then put in a placeholder. That way, when you write a formula in a cell and you want to jump down, you know that you not jump down to the bottom of the sheet, but you jump down to the placeholder. So now having our placeholder where we want it to be, let's go back up and apply the formula downwards. Remember, we want to apply the formula to the cells below. So in order to do that, we need to highlight the cells below whilst we are jumping down. And we do that with Control Shift and then the down arrow key. Now, as you can see, we've jumped down and we've highlighted the cells that we want to apply the formula whilst we were jumping down. And now to apply the formula, we use the Control plus the D key. Now, once you do that, you see that Excel has applied the formula up until the last row of the sheet. Now, this method prevents you from scrolling all the way down if you had 10,000 rows or 20,000 rows or even 5,000 rows. It also prevents you from skipping cells like the second method, where when you double click, Excel applies the formula up until an empty cell. Using this method will also improve your speed. So I recommend practicing filling cells down this way. In order to fill cells down this way, always go into your data set, jump down to the last row in the data set, put in a placeholder in the column that you wrote your formula, and then go back into the formula at the top, Control Shift down to the placeholder, and then apply your formulas using Control D key. So with that, let's look at filling cells to the right hand side. So let's tackle this problem again. Using our knowledge of filling cells to the right hand side, we need to apply the tax rate to the gross amount. The tax rate is here. In order to get the net amount to be equal to the gross amount divided by the tax rate. And we've been able to calculate our net amount. Now we want to be able to apply this formula to the right hand side using knowledge of navigation tips. And similar to the initial example whilst we're filling down, in order to fill cells to the right, the first thing we need to do is to be able to determine the last column in our data set. And to do that, we come to anywhere in our data set, and then with our knowledge of jumping to the right hand side, let's jump to the right hand side to see what the last column is. And to do that, we jump with the Control right arrow key. Now, as you can see, we've jumped from the beginning cell to column AP using the Control right key. And this has prevented us from scrolling all the way to the right. If you had multiple columns, all we needed to do is use a Control right and we jump to those columns. However, if you are scrolling, you need to be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and this takes so much time. So now we are at our last column in our data set, and what we need to do is we wrote the formula in this column. So now let's place a placeholder in this column. And the reason why we are placing a placeholder is so that when we jump to the right hand side, Excel does not send us to the last column. And let me demonstrate this. Let me take off the placeholder and jump to the first column. Now this is where we've written our formula. So see what happens when I combine the Control with the right key to jump to the right. So now I use Control right. You see that Excel has brought us to the last column in Excel. So in order to be able to stop at the last cell in our data set, I need to be able to place a placeholder at the last cell in the row that I've written the formula, so that when I jump, I don't jump to the last column in Excel, but I rather jump to the last cell in my data set. So now let's go back to the beginning. Let's go into our data set and then jump to the right hand side and then come and put a placeholder at the last cell in our data set. And now let's jump back to the beginning with our hand on Control, and then we hit the left arrow key. So now we are back at the beginning of where we wrote our formula, and we now need to apply the formula to the right hand side. Remember, if you want to jump whilst selecting multiple cells, you need to add the Shift key. So now let's jump to the right hand side using the Control plus the Shift and then the right arrow key. And as you can see, we've jumped all the way to the right hand side and we've highlighted the cells as we were jumping. Now if you want to apply the formula to all the cells that you've highlighted, we use the Control, and with our hand on Control, we press the R key. And once we do that, we've been able to apply the formula to the right hand side. And this is very, very quick. It will take you just a few seconds to be able to apply the formula to the right hand side. I strongly recommend you practicing these two examples. You will no longer be using the mouse to scroll down whilst applying formulas. This will save you so much time and improve your speed in Excel. So I recommend you practicing this method over and over again so you get the hang of it. And once you do, I recommend you switch to filling cells this way. It's better, it's faster, and it makes you look cool while doing it as well. So another thing I've done is that I've created a sheet where I summarize all the navigation tips that we applied in the preceding examples. Now, as you can see, I've broken it down into 4 different sets. The first thing has to do with jumping down, up, left, right, and you can see the combination keys here. The second one has to do with selecting multiple cells, down, up, left, right, with the combination keys. And then the third one has to do with selecting multiple cells while jumping down, up, left, and right. And then I've left you with how to apply formulas downwards and how to apply formulas to the right hand side. So if you find yourself forgetting the key combinations that we use, you can always come to this reference sheet, refresh your memory, and then practice. Again, I can't stress enough how much you need to be able to master this skill. It will really help you in how you use Excel. If you've been able to make it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, share with anyone that you think will need this Excel knowledge. And as always, I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.